For more on the situation in Russia, we turn to CBS News national security correspondent David Martin and former U.S. ambassador to Russia, now a CBS News contributor, John Sullivan. Good to have both of you here. David, let's start on just what happened on the ground. 124 miles outside of Moscow. That's how far the Wagner Group says they got. What does this tell us about Russia's intelligence and military?
Well, it came as a surprise to U.S. intelligence. They had some warning that there was going to be a mutiny, but they were surprised when the Russians put up no resistance, allowed Prigozhin to go into their military headquarters in Rostov, and then send his army unopposed north toward Moscow. And then they were surprised again by how quickly a deal was made. They had expected a longer, more violent affair, and that's why people like the National Security Advisor, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, canceled their travel plans, because there was the danger that this mutiny could mushroom into a civil war, and that brings up all sorts of concerns about the security of Russia's nuclear weapons. And what you learn is that when a person like Putin is sitting on top of an arsenal of thousands of nuclear weapons, his problems very quickly become your problems.
Right. And Ambassador, I mean, it sounds strange sometimes, that phrase catastrophic success, when foreign policy analysts talk about it. But are we actually in a situation where Vladimir Putin is preferable to Yevgeny Prigozhin in terms of running the Russian state?
Well, he's certainly a known quantity. He's a hardened adversary of the United States, but the alternative could be worse. So I think the Biden administration is rightfully concerned, as David suggests, with chaos and uncertainty in Russia with their nuclear arsenal is very dangerous, not just for the United States, but for the world.
So when you look at the map, Rostov, the city that you mentioned, it's a major logistics hub on that route to Moscow. Do we have any insight yet, David, into what's happening within the Russian military right now? Are they remaining loyal to Vladimir Putin?
There was no sign that any of the security apparatus around Putin had switched sides. They seemed to hang tough with Putin. The question of why there was no Russian resistance, I mean, one possible explanation is because Putin told them not to resist. We're going to settle this as quickly and as peacefully as possible.
Ambassador, it was a surprise to many when it was Belarus that announced that they were the brokers here, that the president of that country. Now, that country is pretty much viewed as a vassal state of Russia. Vladimir Putin controls it. There are nuclear weapons that Vladimir Putin says he's putting there. Explain this part of the puzzle. Like, why would Yevgeny Prigozhin move to Belarus? Why are they suddenly appearing to be power brokers?
Well, as you point out, Margaret, Lukashenko is in power now as president because of Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin came to his rescue in August 2020. It was Lukashenko who was dependent on Putin. But now, think about this. This is, as you know, Belarus is part of a union state with Russia. They are conjoined. How dependent now is Putin on Lukashenko? It's evidence of the weakness that this reveals, what's happened in the last 3 or 4 days, the weakness of Vladimir Putin. It's not just an appearance of weakness, it's actual weakness. A person that he has said is a traitor who has stabbed him and his nation in the back, he struck a deal with, a deal that he needed to strike to avoid bloodshed and chaos. What strong leader does that?
Well, exactly. And when you look at, I think for so many Americans who are learning about Wagner Group for the first time, and they just heard Deborah's great reporting there, the U.S. considers them a transnational criminal organization. Is this like the mafia has its own military? I mean, how do we think about this?
Well, Prigozhin himself spent most of the 1980s in prison because he's a career criminal. Wagner operates in states in Africa and elsewhere, not because they're patriots who are executing policy on behalf of the Russian government. They're there to get access to gold mines, oil resources, and so forth. This is a money-making organization, corrupt organization that the United States correctly treats as a transnational criminal organization.
And that's what, David, it was interesting to hear from both the Secretary and Mike Turner, this concern of what happens next, not just in Ukraine, but in Libya, in Syria, throughout Africa. Do we have any concept yet? I mean, does this become a separate company? Does this become part of the Russian military?
Well, I somehow don't think that Prigozhin has gone to Belarus to live out his days in idle exile. I don't think he's out of the game. And although there's been this deal with Vladimir Putin, who says Vladimir Putin is going to deliver on the deal? I mean, if I were Prigozhin, I would keep my bodyguards close and my food taster closer, because poison is one of Putin's favorite instruments of getting revenge.
He has a force of what, 25,000 under his command, allegedly?
That's what he's credited for. He was at the start of this year, he was credited with 50,000, and I think the drop from 50 to 25,000 is a measure of how much they lost in the fighting in eastern Ukraine.
This was great to have your analysis and your reporting. Thank you both.
Thanks, Mark.